Yeah, now we're going to start. Before we get to the presentation, I was going to point out that none of this is Historical Society. These are all from my personal, collection of things. And this is, kind of symbolic of, the sheer volume of materials that are available when you come to French-Canadian genealogy. It's very unlike any other ethnicity that you can find in New England. And let me grab my sheet here. There are several, almost people use as primary sources. This right here, 7-book set, called Tanguay, originally published in 1872. And because of that, a whole book of corrections that was originally published in 1957. What I have is a 1983 reprint. The nice part about this is it's organized by marriage. And it runs till 1825, which is later than some of the others, so you can capture maybe another generation or two. Because if you can connect to someone in here, the way that all of it's done is it tells you who the parents were. It tells you when someone was married, who their parents were, for both the husband and the wife. And French-Canadian women always kept their maiden names, which makes it much, much easier. They don't get lost the way, in English genealogies, they just, disappear. You have a first name and nothing else. Plus this will give you, a lot of the children, sometimes when the children were born or married. So you're getting your connections to just, as soon as you connect with one, you can just go back and back and back to the original immigrant. These are, they call it, the red drawing, as opposed to the blue drawing, which is they fill this whole table. But, these go only to 1760 marriages, so it doesn't go far back. But this was originally published in 1958. This happens to be a 2003 reprint, of it. These are entirely in French, but they have a third volume here, which are biographies of individuals in English. So if you can find your ancestry here, you're getting a lot of it. You can tell it was written or translated by a native French speaker, because you get some awkward, phraseology, of sentences versus a native English speaker. So, and these are a little bit easier to read than that, but it's strictly marriages. And so it's organized alphabetically. So within the family, but each marriage, it gives you, again, the maiden name of the wife, who the parents of husband and wife are, where and when they got married. And when you get all the way back to, as soon as you connect to one, you just go back and back. And it will tell you where the immigrant came from in France, and often who the immigrant's parents were. So the format is easy to read. This last one, single volume, is Jet, I don't know, published in 1983. And, some corrections from 96. This only goes to, this is the easiest one to read. Again, it's strictly marriages, organization. But again, it'll give the marriage, when, where, maiden names, parents, all of that. And it will list known children. And again, helping give you connections in the other direction. But it only goes to 1730. So you only got 100 years plus, in it. But this is actually, this one has the benefit of all the corrections that went through these earlier versions. This here is 30-book set plus an index, that looking at the name, look here, and it tells you which volume and where to find it. For some reason, it's not alphabetical. But this is in English, again, giving you biographies of individuals, and a lot of individuals covered by this. And again, it's a non-native English speaker writing it, but you still have that awkward sentence structure. Right here, were what they call the first Métis families. Basically, in the early generations, there weren't a lot of women in Quebec. You had soldiers, trappers, you know, there, not a lot of French women, so they were marrying Indian women. And so an awful lot of French Canadians have Native American ancestry. You're way back to the 1600s. I mean, I have one, you know, explorer, Jean Nicolet, out in Western Ontario, you know, brought back his Native American daughter. And generation-wise, I think I'm 1/512th Native American. It's been watered down a little bit. This is a 9-book series. I only bought the first 2 because those are really the ones that pertain to my family. You know, didn't want to spend the money on the rest.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Does it use Indian names? Or,
When they have the Indian name, yeah.
Pardon?
When they have it. My particular one, they didn't have the name. He came back to Quebec from Western Ontario with a little daughter and not the daughter's mother, so we presume she must have passed away. And, you know, the nuns gave her, you know, an English, or a French name rather, you know, basically raised by, you know, the nuns at that point. So her, we don't know, but many of them, you know, they do know the names are like this long, and I did a genealogy for one person, and the name literally was a combination of letters and numbers. You know. Here's just 2 books that King's Daughters and Founding Mothers. You know, there was a decade, 1663 to 1673, where the French government wanted to stop this marrying native women. And so what they did, they shipped mostly orphans or very poor girls that the Crown funded their transportation. They were taught how to read and write and provided with dowry, and then shipped them over. And they were referred to as the King's Daughters. And they would arrive in, you know, Quebec City, and usually within a few days they would get married. They were not betrothed to anyone. They were just being shipped over, these single women. And they would arrive, and you had an abundance of single men. And usually within a few days they'll pick one, and they were free to pick wherever they wanted. You know, they were not, you know, forced to marry anyone. And they would quickly get married, and that stemmed the tide of marrying Native women. And so in these books, in these books you have, you know, biographies of the women that were shipped over, who they were. And in fact, they were really the better educated class of people because they were taught to read and write before they came over here, where a lot of people in that day and age didn't. Very similar, this is before the King's Daughter, 1634 to 1662. And again, biographies of women coming over from France. You know, you don't see this with English, you know, genealogies. No one's publishing about, you know, the women. They didn't even record their last names half the time. Just, you know, source book for, you know, finding information. The book French Canadians Coming from Perchet, section of France. You know, again, all people in their biographies. There was one woman who I don't think she was not a King's daughter. She actually came from a higher class family, Catherine Bayon, who descended of Charlemagne. So a whole lot of French Canadians go back to Charlemagne by being descended of, you know, this woman. And this is, you go on the internet, there's just all sorts of garbage genealogies there. You know, people say, gee, I just started a month ago and I'm back to 1400. You know, I don't think so. But, you know, go with it if it makes you feel good. But this is all by, professional genealogists in Europe, documenting from this one woman, and, this one's in my family, is why I bought, that book. In Champlain, coming, the early settlement, companions of Champlain, his first settlement, St. Croix Island, which is actually in Maine, right in the river, middle of the river between Maine and New Brunswick. His first settlement, 1604, the weather didn't work out. The next year, they founded what's now Annapolis, Nova Scotia. My ancestor was the apothecary on that one. The book, Upper St. John Valley, French-Canadian stuff for part of Maine. Beginnings of the Franco-American colony in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. And with all sorts of genealogies in it. I had a bunch of relatives from Woonsocket, so I love that. My grandmother is from Lac-aux-Saumon, again, I don't know how to pronounce these things, in the middle of the Gaspé Peninsula. That's up above New Brunswick. It's where the St. Lawrence goes into the ocean. That town is much smaller than Clarendon. And here's 2 books of their history, that have been written, and regretfully it's all in French, so. And this book, A Distinct Alien Race, it's a little tough, hard reading. It's like a little bit too academic, to read, but it's chock full of information. All the mill towns of New England that had their little Canadas. This is the history of these people coming, how they lived. They were horribly discriminated against. That's what they say, an alien race. They weren't even considered to be, white. These French Catholics were not accepted by the English, Protestants. And, for several generations, and this tells the story. All of these are maps. This one, 1709, it's Quebec City, Ile d'Orléans, Big Island in the center of the St. Lawrence River, and all the towns surrounding on both sides of the river, showing you the individual parcels and who owned them in 1709. That with French-Canadian genealogy, you can actually know where your ancestors lived. And this is from 1689, Ile d'Orléans. It's the island just slightly north of Quebec City, in the middle of the St. Lawrence. And it's telling you where everyone lived. And again, you can see where your ancestors specifically lived. And if you tour around on that island, you can see a lot of people came from, this is Brittany in France, the northwest corner. And again, when you get back to the original ancestor and it tells you where they came from, you can find those places on these maps. Versus here, again, map of France, showing all the provinces. The family we're talking about comes from Champagne, so you're basically up here in the northeast part of, France. Quebec, this one shows all the counties to keep it straight. The family we're talking about is sort of split between, 2 counties here, and a couple more of the same. And on the back of the handout that I gave you are French-Canadian genealogy libraries. These libraries are exclusive to French-Canadian genealogy. They have thousands of reference books, for everything under the sun. You can go there and all day long just keep recording your family. The premier one, in my opinion, is the first one, American French Genealogical Society. I think it's the largest of the libraries, and they very much, on this genealogy we're going to do, I ran into question of something, the sources seem to be conflicted. Because I was trying to do all of this from home. And that wasn't going to work, so I took a ride down to Woonsocket. It's about 3.5 hours from here, so it's not too bad. And there you have people that know this stuff like no tomorrow. You tell them what you're looking for and they'll help you find it. But there are others around New England. The other side of it, I just put some, little translations. There's just a couple things here that really matter. Where we're used to, like, B period on English genealogy, born. It's in French, it's N period. N is born, B is baptized, D is died, but S is buried. And it's important because a lot of times with this you'll see N and S with dates because the records are mostly kept by the Catholic Church, and when you were born and when you died was much less important than when you were baptized and when you had a church burial ceremony. So that's what their focus was. The other thing that's important to remember about halfway down, 7/5/1722 is May 7th, 1722, not July 5th. That they invert from what we do, and that's a very easy mistake to make when you're looking at sources. And then on the bottom, I just threw some, occupations, that you may see when you're looking at a record. And I'm going to show you one more chart here. With this, you end up with most French Canadian genealogies, you'll end up being descended of the same person multiple times. Because we're going back to the early 1600s, there weren't many people in Quebec. And the millions there in New England, all back to a small group of people. So what I did here is that women are having children from, say, their late teens, so their early 40s at least. And so I said an average maybe 30-year span per generation. So if someone were born in 2020, their parents born in 1990, there's 2 parents. And each generation keeps doubling how many ancestors you have. And I got in my own genealogy, some of these go back to 15 generations. And there weren't 16,000 people in Quebec, back then. Even going up a couple generations, there weren't that many people there. But when doing a French Canadian genealogy, because the church kept such extensive records and women were all clearly identified, they kept their identities, that you just keep doubling, I had those maps all go in, I had this giant binder that's so big I slip it under a bed because there's no place else it fits. I have my father's genealogy, which goes back to 1600s Dutch and English and mid-1800s German and Irish. And it all fits on one sheet. My mother's French-Canadian genealogy that doubles every generation, it takes 52 sheets, to fit hers. And so anyone who does a complete genealogy is very voluminous because every generation, the information's there, to use. So, okay, so what we're focusing on here is going to be one specific family in just the paternal line. So we're not dealing with a lot of people because my intent was to show how I went about doing it, the sources of, that are available. And those sources are pretty much the same no matter who the family is. And this particular family happened to have all the little buttons that I want to, point out. And this map up here basically centers on 3 rivers right in the center, halfway between Quebec City and Montreal. That's where this family goes back to. this up. You know, and St. Etienne de Grace up there, now each down here, and I got to blow it up a little bit more, even another St. Thomas de Caxton. And actually, before I go any further, I don't speak French. I don't understand spoken French. I took French for 4 years in school. The French 3 was the only thing I ever got to see in high school. It was at least 1 year too many. But I can read enough to understand some of the sources for genealogical purposes. They use the same formats, and so not only can I not speak or understand someone speaking French, my pronunciation is probably not even in the ballpark. So anyone here that speaks French, please, ignore how I pronounce something. Because at this stage, I'm probably not going to learn the correct way to pronounce it anyway. I couldn't do it when I was in school, and that was a few years ago. So, okay. And so what I've got, here, I have a finished chart back to generation 1, the first person, and so this chart is finished. But as I go through this, of course I'm starting with the answer, but I'm going to try to show you how I got what I did, and I also had a little bit easier in that the person I'm starting with, Irene Greenwood, I already knew she was French Canadian because Kevin told me she was French Canadian, so for starters. But if I didn't know, if he said she was French Canadian and I didn't know anything else, and say her name is Greenwood, I would know that's not her real name. That was an Americanization. Given the prejudice against these French Catholics coming down, a lot of them Americanized their name. And a lot of times it was just a simple translation. What's Greenwood? Boisvert in French. And in fact, they were the Boisvert, family. So the way I start this, okay, this is ancestry.com, and so I just brought Irene Greenwood and this is, I gotta change my database. It's still in Canada. Earlier into the United States. Okay, so United States database, I'm just sorting on Rutland County. So I'm saying, well, okay, I don't know where she lived, but she lived here locally somewhere, and the name's Greenwood. And so we start here, marriage records to see what it tells us. Okay, we have, let me get this, I'm not getting my full screen here. Okay, well, we know she married Ralph Hale Peck. Let's get into the same place a different way. And so here's the record. Irene Blanche Greenwood married Ralph Hale Peck, 1915. She's from Three Rivers, Canada, Americanized that too. Her father's Arthur Greenwood. Her mother's Anna Delala Vincent. So say, okay, she's probably, someone pronounced it right. Our town clerk, Davis, didn't know what she was saying and just kind of wrote, something else. So we know, okay, Arthur Greenwood, but it's something with an A, but probably not that, because that's not real. But I can go to, we have a death record. Load this up. Okay, so it's Irene Peck. She's from Canada. Married to, that just to be a typo, Arthur Greenwood. And here's her mother, Analda. Now we have a real name. So we know what that is. And, there's nothing else there in that one that we need. And we have an obituary for her. And we can see what this says. Okay, when she's born in Canada, Arthur and Alta Vincent Greenwood. And there wouldn't be anything else there that we need, but it's sort of affirming what was on the death record. And something I suggest is when you have multiple documents, kind of look at them all because they may be saying something different. The first one could have an error. I just went by her marriage record, I don't know, like, okay, that's not the name, even though the record said it. Records are often wrong. That's why here, look at multiple records to see what it is. But something else with names here. But she's born in Canada, 1897. We have, right here, load up. This is the record from the church. She's being baptized on the 26th. And these things always start with the date here, that she's being baptized. Bear in mind, this is Irene being baptized Marie Blanche Boisvert. So she's being baptized Blanche, legitimate daughter of Hercule Boisvert, farmer, and Analda Vincent of this parish, and then goes on with godparents. And so what this is, Irene, when a priest came to baptize someone, if the priest didn't like the name you were using, you didn't get baptized with that name. An example I've told people, I have a cousin born in 1949 named Stephen. His mother wanted it with a V. The priest said, absolutely not. He said, not a saint's name, it has to be PH. So he's Stephen with PH. That was just in 1949. You're going back into the 1800s here, late 1800s. Priests were very powerful people in the community. And Marie, any good French girl was named Marie. My grandmother was one of 9. Her 3 brothers were Joseph. But they all went by, their first names were Joseph, they went by their middle name. All 6 girls, their first name was Marie. But you go by, my grandmother was Marie Bernadette, so she was Bernadette, to distinguish her from all her other sisters named Marie. And so this priest said, you're not Irene, you're Marie, for the baptism. And we know, because it's telling us, in here, that who the parents are. But and something here. Go back to this chart, and just a little trick that I use is I build a rough chart of who I think they are and who I think they are. Go back to Irene here. trees. There's only one Irene Greenwood in Rutland County. And I look at this and I say, okay, I don't like this one because it's just saying Canada. Not very precise. So I say there's 48 others here. I'm going to look at another one of those. This one, St. Etienne de Grace in Quebec. So this is more specific. And this one's calling her Boisvert because that was the real name. It wasn't Greenwood. And here, Irene, marrying Ralph Hale, children that made it into that chart. But here's her father, Arthur Boisvert, and Alva Vincent D. Mayhew. Early on in Quebec, people frequently had two last names. You had last name D, some other last name. Over the generations, most of them dropped either the first last name or the second last name and settled on one. The Boisvert's case, we'll see, they settled on the second one. Boisvert was the deep name. But to make a chart, I say, okay, I have Irene and Ralph, then I have Arthur and then Alva, then I have Onesime and Carolyn, and I just keep going back as far as this goes, and I build a chart. I pull some of the detail off of that. And it doesn't mean I'm not accepting that as correct until I prove it back to myself, because I don't know this person that made this. And Ancestry is flooded with bad work. The French-Canadian ones are somewhat better than most of the others because there's this mountain of data, of real sources that people can tap. And so the French-Canadian ones are much, much more accurate than everyone else's. But still, for this purpose, I said, yeah, okay, this one looks good, but I'm not accepting it. But I'm going to build, a chart. My first chart did not look like this. I went back making changes and additions and corrections, as I bring it back. So, let me go back here. So we know clearly who Irene is here. Going back. Okay, so now we want to look at her father. And I kind of skipped over one thing about her father, because the baptism record said her father was Hercule Arthur, and the French, all the records they kept, names were a little fluid here. But anyway, we'll come back to Arthur Greenwood, and we have a couple death records, two different Arthur Greenwoods. This is the one I want. And this one is noting Boisvert, with it. Whereas his children only ever knew the name Greenwood, and they just stuck with it. He grew up as a Boisvert. He just switched to Greenwood probably to fit in when he came to the U.S. And saying his father is Lissom, I don't know. But that jumped out at me as like, okay, that's not his real name, that's a nickname. And then I see the mother is Carolyn Belmore, and again, saying that looks like an Americanization. It's probably really Belmar. Throw an extra E in there, and that O becomes an A. But again, he's not the one providing this. This is the one of his children providing it. So we can look at his obituary. I've got a bunch of Arthurs here, and that one is, again, I did not do it this quickly when I was doing this. I spent many hours doing this, many, many hours doing this, so, but I sit here today, I already know all the answers, so I can quickly just show you, the answers. And again, just like with Irene, I'm looking at multiple sources to see, does it say something different, because I have multiple sources. And so, here, and by the way, the death record I just showed you said 1870, and dying in 1949, the same 79, which meets with 1870. But he's not writing his obituary, he's not filling out his death record. That's an error. And I have a whole binder here for Kevin. Anyway, Marie.
Oh, good. Thank you.
So we look at this one, it's saying, he's born in St. Thomas de Caxton. That was one of the little villages there. Again, it's saying Louis Psalm, so this doesn't help. We know that's not a real name. It's giving the wrong spelling for Belmore, but that's one you can easily say, okay, it's Belmore. You can always count on it. But again, it's one of his kids providing the information, and it's, just looking at sources. Then in this case, here in the U.S., we have a better source of information. And we get to his naturalization. With the naturalization document, he provided the information. And most of us providing our own information are going to be a little more accurate. So I'm going to blow this up. Not quite that big. So here, he's saying born in St. Etienne, Canada, where the other one was St. Thomas de Caxton, and they're near each other. They're not far. But this is going to be the more, and this I'll tell you now, it proves to be the more accurate of the two. And that he married Nalta August 21st, 1895 at Pointe-du-Lac, and that's another little village just outside Three Rivers. He came via St. Albans, where he entered August 15th, 1897, into the U.S. Then it lists the children. There's Irene, born just a couple months earlier in 1897, born in St. Etienne. Then Irma, the second child, a year later, 1898, in Pointe-du-Lac. So that tells us either he came without his family, and given there's more than 9 months difference between when he came in August the year before, that either he came without his family and he went back, and after the second child was born, they came here, or his wife perhaps went back to her parents to have the second child. That she perhaps had a better support network, there. But the other thing, this is, you can see, this is what year, 1936. So he's, 65 years old at this point. And he's gone back to, here's his signature, Arthur Boisvert. He's no longer Greenwood. And and here's him telling us, born in 1871, where the death record said 1870, the obituary said he was 79, he was really 78 years old. But a lot of people, sometimes they talk, they're in their 79th year, which is different than your 79. And people, that kind of mistake is made all the time. But this is a much better source than those other things. And, the source was available, so I, look at it. And I'm going to, as I was building my chart, building this chart, I was paying attention to the women, trying to prove out in the same way. And I'm going to skip over some of that because basically it's the same, in the interest of time, just trying to follow the men back, but for Analta, of course, Analta was really Marie Analta, they're all Marie up there. And the guys, if they're not, you have Joseph's all over the place, Jean Baptiste, all over the place. And with your going by middle names, one of the key exception is the Jean Baptiste. They don't get called Baptiste, they say Jean Baptiste, John the Baptist. But any other thing is the middle name, you're going by. But basically doing this, I did the same thing with, Analta, trying to confirm her information. Okay. And because it's available, let me get back over here. For Arthur, just, in case it should show something, but for some of the more recent generations, I like to fill in a little bit of detail when you got it. Here's the, let's get it this way, 1900 census. They were living in Proctor. Blow this up. Here's the family, the Greenwoods. They've been married 4 years, have 3 children. But this one is saying they all came, the first 3. So Irene and her parents all came in 97. And so this, assuming it's accurate, would basically say Analta went back to Quebec to have her second child. And then, as I said, probably her support system went back to her mother or her sisters, for help. And this is saying he was laborer in a quarry. That's why they were in Proctor. And again, in the interest of time, I'll show you the 1910 census. They're still in Proctor. Load this up. There. And here the, Analta, this was kind of like a Natalie or something, and again, so, she's speaking with a French accent, and you have some, native-born American not understanding what she's saying. They're just writing it down the way they think they hear it. Obviously the family's gotten bigger. They're still sticking to the, 1897. And this couldn't quite, he's in a marble shop, and this is like a turner or something like that. The transcription says tinner, but I think it's probably a turner operating some kind of machine in marble shop in Proctor. I didn't find 1920, and people got missed sometimes, unless the family just left town for 1920. But people are often missed. In 1930, they're in Rutland. And he's changed careers. They're split between 2 pages, but he's changed careers, here. And now he's a watchman for the steam railroad. Blow that up. And children that are still at home are on the next page. Doesn't have anything. So he left the quarry and went to work for the railroad. They're in Brooklyn. And in 1940, which is the last one because he died in 1949, they're still in Rutland, and he's still in the same occupation. And bear in mind, at this point, he's like 69 years old. He's still working. Didn't have pensions or any of those things back then. He worked as long. Of course, it's just them. The kids are all long gone by now. There's Artha and Analvi for her. And he's a watchman for the railroad, so he's still in the same job 10 years later. So as we look here, back here again, we know who he is, and it's time to shift gears and go to Quebec now. And what I'm going to do is change database. First I'm going to say I want to be in Quebec. And now you could be very specific, but I'm not looking to do that because I'm saying, okay, I'm not quite sure which town to put or even which county. Okay, so now we're in Quebec. I'm just first going to very quickly see what's here. So there's, I guess, he's not agreeing with article up there. Okay, so we know that he had gotten married in 1895 in Quebec, and so I'm saying I'd like to find him now before he got married. And they did their census every 10 years like us, except it was 1891, 1881, etc. There's 34 of them, but we already have some hints of where, so he's not married, but let's see, do I hear what I have in here or not? Right, so here it's saying, I don't see an Arthur Boisvert here that fits the profile of who his father, Lissam, but cheating a little bit because I had done digging, I had done dozens of searches, to get where we're going. But you can see that I did that just to kind of point out, okay, just switching to Canada and changing the last name, but the first name is the problem, now. So, and because they're doing many searches, we know his father's name is really Onasing, something like that. At least it's spelled that way. We go to 1891, and I'm going back to this chart where we know it was, this Lissam Boisvert married Carolyn, Belmar. So here, there's not a whole lot of Onasing Boisverts, but here's Carolyn, St. Etienne de Grace. That's, town, we've already seen that name. This is saying about 1841. We knew from that sort of other chart, that he's born in 1840. So I say, here's my guy. here's Onesime Boisvert, Carolyn, you know, he's the right age, and a bunch of children. And the child that is the right age, you know, this is, you know, 1891. You know, we know Arthur Boisvert was born in 1871, and we have a 20-year-old child named Hercules. And did Kevin remind anyone of Hercules as a child? Is there something genetic here? No.
Only in his own mind.
Sorry. So let's again just trying to verify. Let's look at 1881 for this household. You know, and here's now Alexis Boisvert. We're getting this name thing, but Saint Etienne, again, 1842. It's about the right age. Their accuracy was no better than our accuracy in looking at census records, you know. And here, a note someone added is that Alexis really is on the scene. Again, names were sometimes flexible. But we're going to look here. And here's Alexis Boisvert, is the right age. Here's Carolyn Belmar. You know, so this is telling us that Onesime Boisvert also went by Alexis Boisvert. And here are, you know, kids that are, you know, been born at that point. And here's Hercules, 10 years old, which is what Arthur is in 1881. Now, if you had a nice name like Hercules, why would you change it, switch to Arthur?
Too many fights in school.
Okay, and now to really firm it up, 1871 census. You know, for the same household, same Etienne, here's Onesime, this says 1843. Again, those things are all over the place. And bear in mind, we know that Arthur, from his own records, was born in January of 1871. You know, so when I look at these things, I'm doing it to satisfy myself that, you know, I've got the right. So here's Onesime, Alexis Boisvert, Caroline, the wife. Here's their 11, you know, or 4-month-old child born in January, Hercules. You know, this is Arthur. No, that's good. We're going on really for your Kevin.
It's interesting that both their stones, you know, they reverted back to Boisvert.
Yeah. Well, you saw on his naturalization, 1936, I think it was. You know, he's like 65 or 39. He's well into his 60s at that point, and he's down with Boisvert again. He dropped his Greenwood stuff.
Patricia and Yvonne are both Greenwood.
Yeah. Okay. So now I want to get even more proof. We need to take who are Onesime's parents here. You know, we got Hercules, Arthur, and there'll be another record that actually puts the two together. Yeah, Arthur as a middle name is what it was. You know, so here I want to get to the church records, and we can see there's a zillion of them here, and I don't want to look through a zillion of them. So I'm going to refine this, that Onesime was born 1840, and we've already seen the numbers are all over the place, so I'm going to say plus or minus 2 years. And see, you know, this narrowed down. So now in these church records, I went from 500 some odd to 7. You know, a whole lot easier to find them, what I'm looking for. And here we have him twice. You know, here's his burial record, and if you look at that. And normally the burial record, you know, unless you were young, it isn't going to tell you who the parents were, but it will tell you who the spouse is. And here's on the scene, it's giving you the date, and he's being buried in parish cemetery. And, you know, farmer. This is Mission St. Thomas, Parish St. Etienne, and that's the 2 little villages next to each other. And we've seen both names, and now we see them for the first time together. And spouse of Carolyn Belmar. You know, so again, his burial, just again confirming who he is, or who he was married to. But more importantly, what we want is baptism. And, you know, these are literally the church records that you're looking at. And generation here. Who's this? I'm going to keep looking back here. These names start getting confused. Oh, okay. Baptized in 1840. So here's baptism and Chichi. And so here's on the scene or there, your date, being baptized, born, of the legitimate marriage of Alexis Boisvert, farmer, and Scholastique Lesueur. So this is telling us right here that Alexis Boisvert, Scholastique Lesueur, here she has a deed name, Lesueur de Lapierre, and goes by both, from 1840. Now, I did think I was going to have these, but when I had to go to Woonsocket, where they have thousands of books, they have the parish records, when they get compiled, were called repertoires. They're the church records. And you'll have repertoires for marriages, for baptisms, for burials. You'll have them organize the men, organize the women, and it's another source. And you can sit in and it's amazing how far you can move, how quickly with the repertoires, in one of these libraries. So right here, I think it's this one. Yeah, this is the Point de Lac, fathers and sons. This one is organized. that. And I think this is the one. Yeah. Okay. So here we see Hercules Arthur. Arthur's the middle name. You know, this is the first one that links it. Mary and Alta Vincent. And this is a really strange organization, but 2.05, 2.05, fathers Onasine, but this whole page would all be Boisvers. You know, Onasine, and here's the mother, Carolyn Belmar. But then a more conventional way, and literally for the same parish, in Pointe-du-Lac, you know, just showing you the cover, and is this the one? Which one I clicked? Yeah. This is a much more conventional presentation here. Let's change a little bit. So here's Arthur marrying Alva, and this whole page would be Boisvers. The father is Onasine, the mother's Carolyn Belmar, married August 20th, 1895. This is much more typical of what you'll see. If you go to the French, the French-Canadian genealogy, when I gave you here, you know, the American French Society down in Woonsocket, there's thousands of these. And of course, they're all indexed, so you just kind of look up and it tells you where to find the one you're looking for. Okay, so now we've kind of fully confirmed, you know, Onasine back to his parents, and I was just going to fill in a little bit more. In the 1891, 81, and 71 census, you saw he was a farmer. In the 1861 census, back here, and yeah, we want Yamachichi, you know, they're both similar in age. We know that's where he lived. And being in mind now, he's a young adult, born 1840, and family. But again, we're seeing here, and we know his father had died in 1860, so here's Scholastique, the mother, LaPierre, and she was Le Soeur de LaPierre. So this time now she's a LaPierre using. But here's the family. And here's our own scene, Cordonnier, whatever, who's shoemaker. You know, at that point in time, 19 years old, 1861, still at home. But we want to see 1851 because, where I said the father died in 1860, I want to see the father in the household. You know, again, as trying to prove out, you know, who this family was. Okay, so here's Alexis Boisvert, farmer, you know, same as Alexis Boisvert, Scholastique. Here's Scholastique, now she's sure her other last name. You know, that's where you're doing searches. If they have a deed name, sometimes you just got to look under both names. And when you have middle names and first names, and unless the first name's Marie, you know, you're usually middle name, but with the guys, they may be the first or the middle name. But here is Onstein, day laborer is what he was at that point. And you can see he and his brothers, and one of Onestein's brothers was Hercules. So your Hercules Arthur Greenwood was named after his uncle, Hercules. It's a family name. Very look at the baptism of Onestein. And we look at the, I think we already looked at the burial record. Yeah, we already looked at the burial record for him. But let's go back. Occasionally you get a real treat. Something you weren't expecting, and we got one here. There's Onestein Boisvert. So that would have been Irene's grandfather. Throw a picture with it. So you can see, white hair, blue eyes. Yeah. Right, so that's your grandmother's grandfather. So that's your great-great-grandfather. And occasionally, there's something there, and that's why I always look, just as, checking multiple records to see if they say something different. There's something else special here, right here, that saying that Onestein Boisvert has a Native American ancestor. Now, it's not in this particular, it's not in the Boisvert line. But it's telling us here which line it's from. Pierre, Michel Febvre de Lasserie, I can't pronounce it, and Jean Aunois. Except here is this is her name. What? And most of the Native American names that I bump into are like that. This one doesn't have any numbers, in the name. But so one of those lines, that the mother is Native American. If we were splitting this each generation, doubling here, which we weren't doing today. But this right here is saying, okay, there's something interesting, find if you want it. Where are we? Okay. Skip her. Okay. Now, basically, what we've been showing is the further back you go, the fewer the records. So we're back far enough in time here that basically there aren't any more census records. They started the full census in 1851. So we're past that. Basically, you're just going to have the baptism, burial, marriage records, and occasionally one or more of them may be missing. But those are what you have. Basically, it's the same as those handwritten church records. They all start with a date. They always make clear that the child is legitimate. Marriage, the parents belong to this parish. Who the parents are, go into the other, say godparents. And, so I'm going to skip forward, because otherwise I'm just showing you the exact same thing, just a different name. Here as we're, coming back. And to get back here, who do I have here? I have another, let's see, Francois, guy so Alexis Boisvert, who married Scholastique, you know, that we've seen a couple of her things. His parents' marriage, when I was down in Woonsocket, you know, I just pulled a couple of these repertoires. And so this, just to cover the book came from, this is Yamachich, you know, again, one of the local towns. Let's see if I can blow this up. And Alexis's parents were, you know, Francois Boisvert. This whole page is Boisvert's. You know, February 8, 1779, marrying Francois Guyot, and his parents were Francois and Madeline Pichet. And that's why, you know, you can sit all day going from one after another, building a basic chart, just marriages, but then you can go back with these repertoires for baptisms, you know, or burials. You know, they're usually done, sometimes you have a book at church, it'll be like a third, sometimes they're separate books depending on how big the church is. But these repertoires are very easy to work with. And a whole lot, especially when if you're not comfortable reading those, you know, church handwritten records. But these repertoires are compilations from those handwritten church records. But once you get back to these early generations, you have those books, that gray 7-book set, you know, the 2 red books and the blue one that I pointed out, hanging down, you know, it fell down. That make it really easy. And so I got this one. I am going to pick up here with, I'll show you where. So we've come down a couple generations, but Francois de Nevers de Boisvert, you know, it's when they had 2 last names too. And they ended up ditching the de Nevers and stuck with Boisvert, with Madeline Pichet. You know, so that's kind of our starting point here, where you very rapidly just go back. So here, this is from the blue book. When I went to Woonsocket, I had a question back here, and the guys I worked with said, you know, go with that one. So that's what I did. So this is saying, you know, de Nevers, Francois, whose parents were Etienne de Nevers and Jean Lemay, marrying Marie Madeline Pichet, whose father was Pierre, and mother was Anne Sylvester, married 1722, Pierre, pieces we don't need. And so we now want to see Etienne and Jean Lemay. So here's Etienne de Nevers de Boisvert, whose parents are Etienne and Anne Hayat. This is saying married about 1688, which means they hadn't found the actual record in La Binière. And his mother was Marie, or the wife of Marie Jean Lemay, who her parents are. And here's their 4th child, Francois, married 1722, Matt Pichet, you know, that we just saw. But here, now we're looking for Etienne and Hayat. And this, so I have to get out of here and to the page before that, because they're all in date sequence of marriages. So here's Etienne de Nevers and Hayat, the wife. You know, here's the one we just came from, Etienne with Marie Jean Lemay. You know,
this one saying he's born about 1661, because there was a record somewhere that he was 6 years old, recorded in 1667, he was 20 years old, recorded in 1681. Giving some other tidbits of information. The wife, her parents were Thomas and Jean Boucher. She married in 1678 to Leonard de Boer, which means we know that he died before that date. Which means they don't have his death date, but they know he had to be dead before she got married again. But what this also tells us is Anne Hayat, her parents, looks like they were born here. They weren't coming from, they may not have come from France, that her line may go back further. But this is your immigrant. And interestingly, with the Dana-Vares, or Dana-Vare de Boisvert, he came over, Dana-Vare de Rantigny. So there you're talking a place in France, that they're referring to him based on where he came from, which means the Boisvert originated in Quebec. Greenwood, they probably literally lived out in the forest someplace. Maybe they started trapping or something, but the Boisvert didn't come from France. And these are his parents in France. Etienne's father was Etienne, his mother was Agnes Boisisky. They came from D'Espinay and Champagne. And that our Etienne died before December 7th, 1678, which is probably the marriage date for her. And quite often, the remarriage would have been within a few months, at most, because there was no safety net, and if someone dies and you've got young children at home, whether it was the wife or the husband that died, you needed to get married again quick, just as a function of survival. So he probably died in 1678, but they don't have a record. That's why they're saying before that, and that they were in La Binière, which is again a nearby town, and how old he was, being recorded 40 years old in 1667 in Cap Rouge. He was in Three Rivers by early 1650, but their marriage was recorded. But he is your immigrant, and that right here. And from another little source I saw, he was Sieur de Brantigny, an A instead of an E, and that basically means he would have been a landholder there, or I think maybe gentleman class, if you will. That he wouldn't have been a peasant, coming over, that he would have had some, assets, to be called, Sieur, that. And so he may have had the ability when he got here to immediately buy land or whatever it may be, as opposed to people that came over, barely able to pay their passage, to get here. And so that's the chart. That's bringing back the only generations, which is one of the attractions. We have your name change, Boisvert to Greenwood. We have the first name, middle name things, Hercules, Arthur, baptized Marie, her name's really Irene. And all of those things are common. And the deep names, Dana-Vare de Boisvert, Scholastique here, Monsieur de la Pierre, Francois Gaillot de St. Louis, Madame Pichet de Dupré, Marie-Jean Lemay de Poudre. That
mother was a Daigle, and he came over, he was Daigle to well, Daigle to German. So he came from Vienna. So a French person coming over from a German-speaking place. He may have had a German accent, he may have spoken German for all I know, but that deed name didn't stick because it was specific to him, the German. His kids wouldn't have been called the German. So that was a one-generation deed name, where my grandmother was Baquet di La Montagne, the mountain. And they probably lived on a mountain, or base of a mountain, something, and that distinguished them from other Baquet, families. And so oftentimes there was, meaning to it, a place they came from or something about the family, but when you're looking, you're going to have, often two last names, going by first names, maybe a difference between the baptismal record and every other record, because the priest is saying, no, she's got to be Marie. And you're not going to question the priest. That was the beginning and end. Not much different than my cousin in 1949. Even in a priest saying, no, you are not going to spell his name with a V. End of discussion. But basically, that is the Greenwoods.
Nothing.
So I don't have any questions, but, and all of, help, you want to look at things yourself.
So I have a question for you. You've continuously gone back to the ancestry.com on those pages.
Yeah.
So is that all contained within the ancestry.com research? I mean, really?
All those things are there, there's more all the time. I mean, the repertoires aren't on Ancestry.
Right, you went down on one side, but the
And,
others.
those books,
Right.
you're not going to find any of those pages, unless someone actually copied pages and attached it to their
Sure.
thing.
But like all the church records and stuff that you were pulling up within the ancestry thing.
Yeah.
I'm blown away.
That's
How
all,
much stuff is in
But that's the French-Canadian. You're not going to
Right.
find that level of detail with other nationalities.
No.
And I'll tell you, in New England, the dominant nationalities are English, Irish, and French. Well, the majority of people have some combination of that. You're going to find enclaves of everything else. Italian, Polish, Greek, Portuguese. Every other nationality is going to have their neighborhoods or a town with lots of them. But throughout New England, there's English, Irish, French everywhere. All of my cousins on both sides of my family, English, Irish, French. My wife's, English, Irish, French. And it's, but the French records, as I say, my father's on one sheet, my mother takes 52. That the sheer volume. You go down to the library, there's just thousands of these repertoires. And you get the blue book, which is dozens and dozens of books. And it's rather amazing. And that does not exist for any other group.
It's eye-opening. Oh, I'm sure. Right, there's a subscription.
Yeah.
There are different levels. I subscribe at the highest level, and I look, this year was $409 per year. That includes newspapers.com. Now, I didn't need newspapers.com for this because we had the obituaries and death rep, all of that, but I use newspapers.com pretty much every day for Historical Society stuff. In Vermont, it's very thorough coverage. A lot of places in the country, you don't have much in newspapers.com. Just as you go up to Quebec, you're not going to find much in Find a Grave. So for me, Find a Grave, newspapers.com, and Ancestry is where I get most of what I need. I mean, I have sometimes just do general searches or things like that, but you still need to check, not just take those family trees, because there still can be errors, in them. People get sloppy. you know, but as I said, the French Canadian is a little more accurate than others because it's just more thorough. The information's everywhere. It just gets a little confusing. You go back and, you know, and this interchange. Okay, this time, was first name or middle name? You know,
Fascinating.
and Kevin's middle name is Hercules. I don't even know why.
The priest wanted it to be Kevin, my father wanted it to be Hercules.
No,
Well, yeah, family names get passed
another
down.
maiden changed his name. Did you notice they had changed it when he got married? She didn't want him to be known as Hercules. She didn't want her Hercules.
I mean, family names get passed down, so I don't know what went wrong here. Do they keep passing down Hercules?
The other name, though,
It can be revived.
Rock is a house.
Or can be revived, yeah. Is it time for another son?
Arthur is his father's son, but, I mean.
Arthur says that ship has sailed.
That's father's son, absolutely. Arthur is
My brother Dale.
Okay.
All those sheets plus summary in there.
I dragged my brother Dale.
How's he doing?
Good.
You're involved with Rutland store.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, thanks a lot.
Oh my gosh, we have